All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Creator Pro Show. And today we have two very special people on the show. Not just special, but very important because we are going through a time that's clearly challenging for everybody when it comes to business, finances, personal growth. And the two guests today are exactly the people who I would recommend you to follow and listen to get through these hard times. We've got Mallory Rowan and Josh Reyes of Ottawa. And Mallory is a serial entrepreneur who has founded 4 businesses and created a net worth of over $1 million by the age of 29. She has a coaching business. She helps businesses online to be able to increase their revenue as well as their exposure and their content, as well as she does share a lot of personal development content. Josh is a award-winning realtor out of Ottawa, and the two of them are partners. They're a couple, and I would say a power couple. And on the side of that, the cherry on top is that they're very, how do you say, like fit buff. You guys have great content.
I would never personally say that, but
no, we would say fitness influencers as well, because I do get inspiration from you guys. A lot of the stuff that you have done over the past watching your content, like quitting bad habits and walking your audience through how to do that, has been very empowering because you can't find that kind of content anywhere else. So welcome to the show. And I'd like to give you guys a mic a little bit and give us a bit of your backstory, how you guys met and what your journey's been like with the business growth and everything else over the last decade.
yeah. So Josh and I like cheesily met in the gym. And then I was, lifting heavy. Josh was on the powerlifting team at school, and he was honestly just trying to recruit girls for the team. So that was how we met. We became really good friends. And then we were doing this awkward back and forth of like, are we friends? Are we more? And we're like, let's just start this business together. We're just friends starting a business together. And that was how our first business was born, which was a powerlifting apparel company. And that was really our first taste. I was already working in startups before that, so I was really into that space. But I didn't really think I would jump into a founder role, and Josh was kind of a good push for that. So we built that business up. It was a great time in powerlifting to be starting. We were able to grow really quickly. We had the top powerlifters as athletes with our brand. And then from there, as we got a little bit older, we started to think more about what we wanted in the future, repositioned a bit. Josh got his real estate license. I started teaching people. I burnt out really hard from the first business, so I started teaching people how to build without burning out because I had made some changes in my business after that were really impactful. And that's kind of what led us to here. And I would say also just being like obsessed with personal finance was a big driver behind our business always too.
Mm-hmm. That's a great story.
And that was in a span of 10 years though. Mm-hmm. So it feels like a really long time, but also not because of just all the pivots we've made. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a good example of being consistent and playing the long game, right? Everyone wants quick and now, but when we reflect on our journey, it's 10 years almost.
When you guys first started, was there like a side hustle or a specific business that pushed you guys into wanting to get into business? Like what is the story there? How did you really get into business?
For me, I've always kind of been, I guess not entrepreneurial at the time. When in high school, I just wanted to make money, like I wanted to be self-sufficient. I had goals of like being rich and financially free. So in high school, I had like a couple side hustles. I've been cutting my own hair since I was in grade 7.
Nice.
So then I would eventually cut my friend's hair just for fun. And it wasn't a business, but they would pay me. And then just like a few little side hustles in high school that kind of got me into making money, but I never thought of it as a business. At that time, to me, a business was like Facebook, like Instagram,
Something
Apple,
big.
like these.
Big
Yeah, like
business.
that's big. Like back then, social wasn't as big, so you didn't really see other types of businesses besides these tech giants, right? So
Or small business was like a restaurant.
yeah,
Yeah.
And then I'm like, people thought that was like boring, but now I'm like, oh man, it's just, these boring businesses are really hot right now. Actually, like a lot of people are doing boring businesses and they're becoming really successful, but before it wasn't the same exposure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I really love about watching you two is the fact that you're not just making one type of content, you're bringing your audience through the journey. And throughout the years, I've seen you go through different things from like talking about your burnout and how you were able to overcome that, and then teaching others on now not to get into the same areas that you fell into, and then also teaching people on how to be financially literate and owning properties and getting into your investment. You guys bought your Airbnb, your cabin, which I checked out, was absolutely picturesque and beautiful. So we want to get into some of the stuff. Maybe you want to tell us a bit about how you started your first business together, and then how you burned out, and why you burnt out, and what brought you out of that.
For us, I was actually in a university class where we had to work on a business, and Carleton was really great at encouraging entrepreneurship. So our teacher, said, if you have an actual business already, do that. Don't make up some pretend thing. If you have something you want to pursue after this, do that. If you want to work with somebody outside of the class, do that. So that's what we ended up doing, was starting this apparel business together. And it actually started with like all these big ideas, but us knowing we didn't have any knowledge on research and development. Like, we didn't know how to make products. And we were, facing all these obstacles right out the gate. But we also knew a bigger obstacle for us was not feeling represented in the powerlifting community. It was really shifting at that time. And there's so many people like us we were connecting with on Instagram. But I think powerlifting as a whole, people pictured like big bearded, tattooed, like big bellied guys. And there was this new generation of powerlifting that wasn't that. So for us, we were like, okay, maybe we can solve the disconnected community first, because if we can bring together the community, we can launch those other products later. And then for us, the community building was really what we loved and what we thrived in. And so it just turned into staying in that realm and not getting into all these crazy products, because we were already filling a gap with that one.
So is this like a print on demand business, or did you guys have actual stock too?
We had stock, but very much like printing on Bella and Canvas or Gildan t-shirts at the beginning. It was really about like the brand and the community versus a product that was really super different.
It was just a way to support the community in a sense.
Yes, exactly. And then for us, I mean, we were both in school when we started. I was already working in the startup world. We were both competing nationally. And so it definitely, for me, started to add up. We were traveling a lot. Like every weekend we were at a different powerlifting meet, on our feet all day talking to people. And so I got super burnt out from that. I ended up getting pneumonia, and then I just couldn't really shake it. And that's when I realized, like, okay, my body's in a place that it can't come out of this, and I need to take that as a sign. And that's really when we repositioned things and took the time, because we were 21 and 22 when we started that business. We hadn't really thought like, oh, do we want to make t-shirts for life? Are we building this to sell? Like, you don't have any of those thoughts. You're just like, do we like this design, right? So it was a good opportunity for us to press pause and say, what are we trying to do here? Is there a next step that makes more sense for us, instead of just running this thing we love into the ground because we started it and we feel like it's the only option?
And that's what business is about, is a constant like going forward, hitting an obstacle, reflecting, maybe recorrecting the course, and then moving forward. And you guys do that really well. So
and I wanted to add too, like during that time from say 2015 to 2018, 2019, hustle culture was very hard, right? And like that's what everyone was pushing, and we were like, okay, like everyone's only sleeping 4 hours a day, might as well do that. That's how you get successful, right? So we were taking all these advices from all these people.
It was like Gary Vee, right?
like Gary Vee.
And we love Gary Vee, but like they're pushing hustle culture hard, and I think that played a role in it, because if we wanted to be successful like them, we had to do what they did, which was not sleep and just always be efficient and good with your time, and you know what I mean? I think that definitely led to our burnout.
That's really interesting you say that, because I've always been very skeptical of the hustle culture, because I need my sleep. And like I can't be the person who doesn't sleep. And people often ask me, like, how do you have 6 kids and run a business and make content and like still be happy and like smile and make funny content? You need to work on yourself. And I think that's what's happening now, is that trend, and you're at the forefront of it, because you're talking about not burning out. You're talking about different things on like taking bad habits out of your daily routine so that you could conserve more energy and you could still be happy and have that. So tell us a little bit about how you got out of the burnout.
Yeah, for me, it was really stepping back and looking at what things I considered part of the work. Actually, a book that was really helpful was The Sleep Revolution by Arianna Huffington. And she kind of talked about, she worked herself so hard that one day she fell over and essentially smashed her face. And then she really started researching the value of sleep. And that book just had so many proof points of how the best thing you could actually do for your performance is get a full night's rest. So that was something that really kicked it off for me. And looking at, okay, what if I actually saw the sleep as part of the work? The same way you see sending the emails as part of the work. It's like, I actually have to give myself this so that I can show up better. So looking at those different pieces, I had to spend a lot of time working with different health professionals too, because coming out of the burnout is so much harder than avoiding it once you've like learned your lessons. Like I find it way easier to just not get to that point now than getting out of it. I spent literally years working with different people because my gut was all screwed up. Like you said, I had hair loss. My skin was just so reactive to everything. So I spent a lot of time prioritizing my physical, but really looking at, okay, what does this next chapter look like? And tactically speaking too, I took on some contracts for friends of mine of running their social media because I was like, this is a time where I can lean into a skill set I have, you know, work really efficient with my time and then prioritize the other things. I think people just think I have to be doing this thing full time. I have to be all in on my business, but it's okay to say, let me step back for a second, reset, but make sure my bills are paid and then continue in that entrepreneurial journey. Because if you are in it for the long run, it's okay to have those moments of pressing pause, because I think that's why we haven't burned it all down. I think the last year and this year, we've seen a lot of people in the online space and creators burn it all down, go on like year-long sabbaticals because they just hit that point where all of a sudden they're done. And I feel like I've been able to figure out, okay, I don't want to do that again since I did it the first time around. So how do you know, do it more sustainably?
And that's a very good point, because people think it's a linear way when they're doing business, that they always have to be progressing upwards. Sometimes it's okay to take a pause and time to reflect, because you reaching your success point or trying to reach someone else's success point, we're all on different timelines.
Yeah.
So you don't have to get to X goal within X amount of time. It's okay if it takes a bit longer, as long as you're constantly progressing, growing personally, and taking care of your body. Because if you don't have what it takes to maintain a healthy lifestyle, you're not going to go far.
Yeah.
Right?
And people will ask too, like, how do you stay motivated through everything? And it's kind of like saying, like, how do you stay happy through all the bad times? Like, you probably don't. You probably have some moments of sadness. And I think it's similar to the hustle culture. We have all these myths of things like motivation. Like, people might look at me and attribute my success to motivation, and I can have really long windows where I'm not motivated. And maybe, you know, some people say it's discipline. I kind of say it's more grace, of giving yourself grace of, okay, maybe this is a season where I'm not posting as much in my feed because I don't feel as creative and it's not going to come out the same way. Or maybe it's a time of discipline. You know, I've had times where I have to just say, with social as an example, like, okay, I just like don't have capacity to make the kind of content I want to make right now. And then other times I have a phase of just saying, you know what, you have to post twice a week no matter what. But there's times where that doesn't work. And then there's times where I'm just so motivated that that is what I'm riding. But I think people want to find this high at all times. And there's nothing else in life where we expect to be just like living at a high. Like, you would assume somebody was on something, right? Like if they're high all the time on life, like you'd be like, where are your downs? But in business, we think we're not allowed to have the downs.
That's true. Yeah. I want to kind of get into, you know, we're living through a time where we see all these stats. And in Canada, it's becoming so expensive. The cost of living is ever increasing. Interest rates have gone up. It's tough to maintain a business, let alone your financial assets. And you guys have done a great job at building this wealth together. You have an Airbnb. I think you have properties. You have a business, obviously. And you're doing really good at managing your finances. You're teaching your audience and your followers the same. And it's ever so important to get that feedback, to learn from people like you who have done it. You know, I'm sure you use your real estate knowledge as well to combine it to grow. Tell us a little bit about how you were able to set up financially, and what tips do you have for the audience? Because there's a lot of young people under the age of 40 that can't attain the same wealth or even savings. What are some of the steps that have initially helped you guys take that first step that then kind of built the momentum towards building this portfolio?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. For us, it was almost like not forced, but we had no other option. We went from like broke students to broke entrepreneurs, because we were students when we started, to then eventually, once we had a little bit of money, over those years, we grew as people and as business owners, and we went more like minimal. We were never like big into designer brands or like big luxe spenders anyways. And to this day, we're still figuring out what our rich life is. And I was mentioning it to Mal the other day, like it might not be like a Gucci bag, but it might be like a really, like a nice hotel where you feel...
It was heated tiles in the bathroom at the hotel.
Heated tiles.
I'm
like, that is my Gucci bag. If I could have heated tiles everywhere, I'll spend my money on
That's
that.
very common amongst the younger generation,
Yeah.
is that they're willing to spend more on experiences than
Yeah.
material things.
Yeah.
And I love this movement because it's very important to understand that the Gucci bag is not going to serve you any better than like a regular bag, but that experience is going to stay with you and it's going to help you personally grow. And I see you guys doing vacations, traveling and vlogging the whole thing, which is great because we get to come along with you and learn on how your mindset is appreciating and bringing in more of this abundance of like experiences. And I think that's part of it. But tell us a little bit about how you were able to save your first amount, because getting into real estate is very difficult. You need a down payment. Which one of the businesses was the most contributing factor to that?
Yeah, this is a great story, actually. So when we were doing that debate, when I burnt out with the first business, when we pressed pause to be like, what do we want to do? We actually found out we were getting like a $18,000 tax return, mainly because we had spent so much on inventory.
Cha-ching.
We were in the hole that year.
Yeah, it's like it's sick, but it also wasn't sick that we were getting that big of a tax return. But for us, we looked at it and we were like, oh, this is almost a version of selling our business. Like if we decide we don't want to move forward and the trade-off is we walk away with $18K, we were like, that's kind of interesting. And looking at, could this first business be the thing that taught us a lot and also then gave us like this pot at the end of the rainbow almost of, hey, this could go into the next thing, especially because we had learned so much with an inventory style business. And there was just so many question marks for us of like, okay, do we want to almost just like do this all again? And so for us, we took that $18K and we ended up, using that as a base for a down payment because we were like, if this business gives us a property, that's a trade-off we like. And I think often it's if you can take a bit of the ego out of it of, okay, are we continuing this business because we don't want to quit something, we don't want to fail, when all of the signs were saying we'd really enjoy doing something else. We also feel like for where we are and like consumerism, we weren't feeling great about launching clothing collections nonstop. And then just seeing that aspect of how can we put this into the next thing was really helpful for us. And I think that's what we've continued is we always look at how can we take the current wins and turn them into future wins. Because one, we don't like feeling stuck to anything, especially being someone online. I never want to feel like I have to show up. Like if I ever get over it, I don't want to feel like I can't walk away from this because this is all I have and this is what I built. So for us being able to know that we might want to pivot, so putting, our profit from our business into investments, into the next real estate, instead of necessarily going super luxe on the trip, right? We take the trip, but we make sure we're still investing. And I think that's really important because also things change. Like I said, a lot of people have taken sabbaticals or years off, or you just might want to have a new business idea that you really want to go after. And for us, it's building in that stability of what we do is very unstable, just both being entrepreneurs. So if we can just know we're building that nest egg essentially and those smart investment choices for going forward, it lets you take bigger risks.
And that first property, what was it? Was it an investment property or one that you would live in?
No, it was like a suburb townhouse that we were living in. So actually Josh's mom helped us buy it initially and we were renting from her and then we bought it from her.
That's great. So one of the first lessons is don't go spending money on, the material things. In this day and age, everything is really tough. Put all your eggs into investing in yourself. What's going to help you catapult forward.
Yeah.
Buying real estate is one of them. And also getting whatever help you can. I know she probably didn't help you much, but that little bit of help was
huge.
great enough to get you going. And then but now you also own an Airbnb that you're renting out a cabin, a beautiful cabin. Where is the cabin located?
It's in Val-des-Monts, Quebec. So we have our suburb house, and then we decided we wanted a lifestyle change and wanted to move more into the city in Ottawa. So we moved and got a long-term tenant in that first property, moved to a new primary, and then this was 3 years in a row, actually. So we bought the suburb townhouse, the next year turned around and bought the one in the city, and then the next year bought the cottage, which I think I emphasize because it really shows like once you get that momentum, it can be so impactful because the year before we would not have been able to say like we're about to buy 3 homes. It just doesn't make sense. But when you see the investments and how you can use them strategically, I think that was really helpful for us.
And also being financially literate was really key because we were able to do that because we had 2 good previous years of business. And because we're both self-employed, it's harder to get a mortgage, right? So we capitalized on the fact that we did have 2 good years of business. And because now if business slows down, it might be harder to have done what we already did. So having that knowledge helped us be more prepared to capitalize on an opportunity.
Yeah, very well. Let's get more into the social stuff because you guys are both powerhouses when it comes to creating content. And what I was saying to Mallory was that I love the fact that you haven't niched down to one type of content. And in fact, what you've really done mostly is document your growth, business-wise, financial-wise, personal growth. And it's very relatable. You have content there that is very personal that most people wouldn't share, but I think it helps because a lot of people are behind closed doors are going through the same challenges and they get to see how you've overcome them, but also things that are more common like financial advice and obviously how to grow your business on social media, which is a very trendy topic right now because every business is waking up and realizing that they need to have a presence online. And they're turning to people like you who have obviously shown the proof in the pudding. And I see your testimonials pop up here and there where you've helped this person grow this much, that person grow their business. Tell us a little bit about how you took what you've learned from your personal social media growth and how you're applying that to your clients now who are your students, AKA, like I've been on one of your workshops. They were great. But how are you communicating that? What are the top lessons?
Yeah, I think for me, it's like the marketing foundations is always the same, you know, even if we move into a fully Web3 NFT world, like marketing still has those baseline foundations the same way personal finance does, right? Like don't spend more than what's coming in. And then that's a basic level. And then everything's built off of something like that, right? So for me, it's understanding the focus should be on the marketing foundations. If you can understand, if I can watch one of your videos and say, I see what he's doing, I understand, like I see a hook and I see the call to action or things like that. It doesn't matter if it's a reel or a carousel or if Instagram comes up with some VR thing, you're still gonna go into it and go, okay, well, what's my angle? Who am I talking to, right? Who's my ideal client? Those things remain. So I think that's a really important piece. And I think not getting hung up on the superficial metrics or the surface level metrics. So many people think about the likes or the views. And I would say like my worst performing videos have been the things that have landed me speaking opportunities, one-on-one clients. Because maybe it was just actually one was a podcast clip, which is not my usual content. And maybe people didn't want to listen to someone talking for a longer period, but the people who listened were so engaged and become those high quality leads. So I think people confuse like influencer metrics with business because I have so many clients that have under 1,000 followers and they're making all of their lead generation through Instagram. They're really connecting with that community. So you can do it a lot smaller than you think. And it's just really applying those baseline marketing things of who are you trying to connect with? What do you represent? You know, really getting a little bit deeper instead of telling us just like, I love mortgages and like, I want everyone to get a good mortgage. It's like, okay, well, what are other levels we can connect with you on so that I can have that trust built? It's a big part of Josh's is people connect with him because it's not just real estate content or yourself. It's adding that personality too.
And I think you're applying a lot of that, what you have learned, because your account is quite large. You have 112,000 followers, organic followers. By the way, I wanted to ask you, do you ever put any ads behind your content or do you boost your...
No.
Yeah, that's what I was telling Cam.
All of our businesses are like
Organic.
$0 organic. And as you mentioned, like how I talk about a lot of different things, I feel like for me, it's a bit of that protest of like when people niche so hard and are like, this is the one thing that grew my business. It's not. It can be a big piece, but it's like, it's not just about the personal finance. It's not just about your to-do list system. It's sometimes the fact that I quit drinking taught me a lot about myself that I can then apply as an entrepreneur. So I think I'm trying to show people like, it's not just this one thing of, oh yeah, you have to stay up till midnight or you have to do this morning routine. No, there's so many different angles that are actually what comprises a successful person. And it's just less like cutesy niche marketing to tell people like, actually, it's a lot of things that got me here.
Yeah, and it makes it feel more authentic because they're like seeing different aspects of who you are, and that's more relatable because it's like everybody. This is the problem with niching down is that you're not doing that one thing on a day-to-day basis. You're also a human that lives your day-to-day. You know, you have your grocery shopping, your kids, your working out, your healthy habits, whatever it is, and that becomes all you as a personal brand, and people get to follow that and watch you. And because you guys are role models in your industry, people are taking what you're putting out there like religiously. They'll watch it and say, I need to take these steps towards my business. One thing that I really appreciate about your content is that it's very raw. It feels like it's not polished. It's not overproduced. And I can see you're now putting in some of those strategies towards your Josh's business, which is actually your business because you guys are partners in the real estate team. And I know that you've been in business now 4 years. Is that?
I'm in my 6th year. I just finished my 5th year. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
6 years.
And I got to say, I looked up your awards and it's pretty impressive. And I'm sure that it's contributing, what's attributed is the social media strategy. Because I see you've grown your account drastically over the last year. I have 17,000 followers.
Almost.
Yeah. And it's like legit organic followers. What are some of the strategies that help you most with converting to actual conversations that are discussing real estate transactions? Where do you see some of those responses best on which videos?
Like where are people converting or where am I getting my clients from?
Yeah, like which strategies? So like, because you have a bunch of different type of contents. You have like fitness stuff. You do your running. You're working on your Ironman. You also do like house tours. You do informational stuff. Which ones do you feel like convert most? Or is there one type of video that's converting most, or is it the whole strategy as a whole?
I would say it's the whole strategy, but it's presenting information that people, like everyday people, can consume. And it's, how do I say this? It's all a whole. It's not just like one thing, because I know people follow me for, let's say, a little bit of real estate. But then when they do reach out, they would be like, hey, I've been following you since real estate, but then you actually got me into running and now I'm pre-approved and ready to go, right? I think it's sharing my personal side breaks down the barriers and makes me more of a real person. And it's an easy connection point. Because if I just talk about real estate and numbers, if you're not a numbers or real estate person, you might find it hard to even break the ice, right? But like my biggest client to date was because we had the same dog.
Same dog?
Same dog. Like, hey, I love your content. We have we have the same dog, and I like what you put out, and I feel like I trust you. And he reached out cold in the DMs, and that was it.
And on the back end of things, like what are you guys doing on the outreach side of things? Are you guys doing anything on social media to connect with people further, to build the relationships with your followers, like with comments and all of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, we try to create conversations. We do polls, we do question boxes. I do a lot of, like, when people door knock, like spend 2 hours door knocking, I spend 2 hours trying to connect with people on Instagram, right? I'll comment on posts. I'll go to business accounts that I follow and that I know my target demographics there, and I interact with that business, right? If they reshare people on their stories, I will go see who's posting that business, because likely they might be an ideal client of mine, and I try to interact with them. But that's just, social media is my lead gen.
That's great. And Mallory, I want to ask you, we've had this conversation in the past. Where does your account need to be able to generate business? Because in my mind, I've always been like, no, I got to hit 10,000 followers. Then now that I'm over 10,000, I'm like, no, I got to hit 20,000. But I'm realizing when we had a conversation, you're like, no, you could, I think you can go at any point. So give us a little bit about what are the metrics you use to say, okay, my account is ready to be monetized or use it for my business.
When you have an account. That's what I would say. Because you could start from zero and start building that. I have a mortgage broker client. She has 1,200 followers, and every time she posts, she gets a lead, which in like mortgage or real estate is a pretty good return on your
That's
investment.
amazing, yeah.
Because you're not trying to get 1,000 people through the door, right? But honestly, I think the biggest thing is getting clear. Like everybody wants the tips of like, what time do I post or what hashtags? And I always say like, I mean, that stuff's not as important in general, but actually when you look at a social media strategy, that's maybe around step 5 or 6. Like there's so many steps that come before. So if you take the time to get really clear on the brand, really clear on the customer, and then start experimenting with what content works for you. And when I say works for you, it's more like personality or your filming style. When you say like, I don't do highly produced things, it's actually a reference to our first business if we didn't know how to do like flat lay photography for our products. So instead of doing like a bad version of it, all of our product photos were people wearing it in the gym, in squat, bench, and deadlift, and just really sick photos. So that's always what I say is like, don't be the A- version of someone else's content. I'd rather be the A+ version and just do something totally different. Because if I try to make a really cool edit in my house, it looks kind of like a A-, B+. But if I show up on camera and make a few little funny, cute edits, that works really well for me. So I think that's the biggest thing is just start experimenting with what content works for you. And you will start to see a community form. You will start to see people purchase. And it depends on your business model too. Like something like a realtor or mortgage broker, when you ask about like the comments are engaging, what's nice about a business like that is somebody's always going to at some point be in need of buying a house and in need of a realtor. So for something like that, you can look at bookmarks or like saves or shares, because if you're bookmarking this realtor all the time, that's already probably someone you're going to reach out to, whether we hit you with email marketing in between or not, or invite you to a webinar. Versus maybe something with digital products, you want to be quicker to getting them on an email list, offering them something so that they're coming into the next step of your community. And you can do that with a small audience.
And do you find people are just lacking to set up the systems to convert the followers into like an email list or a system that actually gets a conversation moving?
Yeah, I think just a system, period. Like, I think social media lives in this really weird world where everyone does it, but it might be your mom posting her grandkids or something, and then someone else is using it as a business. So I think sometimes people think social is showing up and posting and mentioning their business, but they're not taking the time to make a plan the same way they would if they had inventory management, or if you have to do a sale for a real estate transaction. You have a system there. So I think sometimes people just are a little too much throwing things at the wall and not realizing there are actual like game plans you can use. I find that especially with Instagram stories as an example, because it's that 24-hour candid experience, people think it is just always pick up your phone and film something in front of you, which that's more of the tactic, but you should have a strategy behind that, right? I start my mornings often with a take what you need poll that is really on brand for me. It often has like little motivational things. It makes people reflect, and people have really enjoyed starting their day with that. But like, make no mistake, I also get engagement at the start of my day, right? By having an interactive element that someone's clicking every day, and also having a piece where people can expect it every morning. I've created like a system within itself that I'm going to start each day with better engagement than the next person who's just posting their morning breakfast, right? So I think it's that combination of always having an intentional strategy behind it.
And then it's just the momentum of the small deals adding up over time, and then you get busier and then more comes in because people want to kind of contribute to what's happening, I find.
Totally. And you can create those user-generated experiences. We would encourage people to post with our first business in their apparel, and we would repost it. And Josh now, like, he does the big bows on a door. We do a closing basket. And that's something that prompts people to want to share it on social, to tag him. And then, like you said, it's that cycle of now people are seeing Josh's clients get really well taken care of. He just had one he was showing me. They took a photo of their dog with the welcome basket, and they were like, our dog loves their new stuff. And that's something where they feel that pull to share, and now he can share that, and it shows those connection points.
And that's cute.
How do you feel about people shutting down opportunities? I feel like with social, you get a lot of random opportunities, but if they're not directly being paid, a lot of people shut them down. Do you think those can start up bigger opportunities with bigger brands? Have you ever had any smaller?
In terms of like brand partnerships or just any opportunity?
Yeah, like podcasts that they'll deny, or any sort of like be in our content, or even partnerships with brands.
Especially if there's nothing immediately in it for you, like whether you're getting paid or like a collaboration that maybe of like with someone who's got a bigger account than you? It's interesting to know. How do you gauge opportunities?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough question because you do hit a point too where there are things where you have to go like, is there enough return on my investment? But when I look at that, it's not always the immediate. Like even us being in Toronto this week, we had a friend from Texas that was going to be in town. So we were like, we'll meet you in Toronto, and I'm, booking a hotel. I'm putting my own money because I know that's a connection that I really enjoy, first of all, but also it's a really great connection for me professionally. And then I did a panel last night, same thing. It was volunteer based, but I'm paying the hotel bill to stay a few extra nights. But for me, that's so worth the trade-off of the people that I met last night, not only from the new entrepreneurs I got to impact, but it was an ad agency hosting it. I was joking with them. I'm like, you want to give me a car next month? Like, let's do it, And they were like, oh, actually, we might have campaigns. So it's like so many of the people I met that night, even though if you look at that, I'm almost at a negative on paper because I spent money to be there. But I think it's so important to figure out your criteria of what feels like an opportunity that can lead to things and not just focused on the short term.
And then it depends on where you're at too, right? Like when you're just starting out, you just need the reps. So if it doesn't fully align with you, but you have no reps of being on a podcast, but you want to be a better speaker, for example, or if you want to start your own podcast, you just have to take the opportunities as they come, and then eventually, you can filter them a little bit, but it depends on where you're at and what your goals are.
It's similar to even brands now, they'll stop sometimes working with massive influencers, and now we have micro and nano, but I find the same thing of sometimes I've done a smaller podcast and I've gotten such great return on investment because that community is so tight knit, and then you could go on a big podcast and maybe you're lost in the noise because you're between two mega celebrities on it, right? So it's really not seeing metrics as the definer when you're making those decisions.
Talk to us a little bit about the importance of a combination strategy, meaning like you do your social media stuff and you're teaching a lot of your students on posting and getting out there and how to generate more engagement, but how much of it is offline? How much of it is directed to workshops? Like you do the webinars, you do probably seminars and get-togethers or like other events. Talk to us a little bit about that and how important it is and what's the ratio.
Yeah, I always say very much look at it as your social should be taking people somewhere else. And I always say take them where you win. So let's say you're great at a sales call. Okay, then you should be taking me to an application form for a call. Or if you're really good at web design and you like to nerd out and get a high conversion on your webinar landing page, take me to that webinar landing page. If you're more of a writer, okay, do an email list and take me to that, right? So really being intentional of what's the next spot you're taking them. I always say as much as I teach social media, you better believe it's one part of a bigger strategy. I always say you wouldn't give Mark Zuckerberg the only key to your house, but you give him the only key to your business when you build exclusively on a platform. You don't know this man, you don't know this algorithm. So if you can always think about where am I taking people, that's your safe space. Email list is like one of the few owned spots. Even if you change email platforms, you take your email list with you, right? So I think that's where people can get burnt out with social too, is they're just posting, and they're just like, my product comes in blue, my product comes in purple, or like, I'm a realtor, I sold this home. But okay, is there somewhere else we can take them? Can we do a virtual first-time home buyer seminar? Because you're also always collecting feedback when you take people to the next step. You get the more intimate settings where you could realize, oh, actually this question comes up a lot in first-time home buyer seminars. Okay, let's make content on it. And it becomes that cycle of really creating, even without like a on paper funnel, because I know a lot of people get intimidated by funnels because they can get intense, but having that, mental idea of where am I actually trying to take people?
This is where your content is very important. And I gotta say, I think for someone who has 112,000 followers, you're making the best use of it. When I say that is because we're now friends and we know people that have really good following on Instagram and they're posting really good content, even 300,000-400,000 followers, but they're not converting any of it to business. Yeah. And you could see that there's some sort of frustration there because they're looking at how is it monetized? And there is a strategy. You can't just put up content and expect opportunities to land on your lap. Yeah. And so like, how would you, let's say, for someone like me, what would be my first step? Let's say I'm a realtor, I'm making funny skits, it's generating a lot of engagement, people love seeing my stuff, they're conversating in my DMs. What would be the next step?
To turn them into customers or to grow?
To turn them into business.
Yeah. I mean, if we take yours as an example, I mean, you and I have talked about this a bit of like the views that you get versus the people who convert to followers. Part of that is just in comedy, we've talked about this, people are more likely to just send it, have a good laugh, and maybe not follow. But for me, I'd start with, okay, well, how can I, if I'm already getting those views, how would I make sure more are converting to followers, which would be playing with a call to action at the end of videos. Some call to actions I've even played with is, comment if you want, people say comment if you want part 2, but let's say I make a video on like my investment strategy. I could say comment if you want a video on how I follow through on hitting my investment goals. So it's a similar topic, but I'm being very specific. And I find that can really, get people more engaged, one, commenting, but also they are more inclined to follow because it's giving that impression of, I make more content like this, right? So that's what I would do with someone like you who is getting views is, okay, how do we get them into our Instagram community and staying there? Because that's like the in-between step to then taking them to the business place, because some will drip right into the end of that funnel and they might watch one video and call you, but other people, they need to linger in your atmosphere for longer. So if we can fill that gap, and then I would look like, okay, what is the best way to get them into a sales space? Like I said, with realtors, I don't believe you need as much necessarily of the email list funnel, because I do think in this day and age, people just reach out. We've seen it, like they'll just Google him or they'll reach out, or people will reach out and say, someone else just told me to reach out. Like the trust is so much bigger that they go straight there. But yeah, I would look at filling that gap first. And if it was for another realtor that maybe wasn't getting the same views as you, things like virtual webinars are so great. I think realtors default to the in-person events, which work well too. But realizing you could do a first-time home buyer seminar once a month. You could do, I have a client that did a self-employed workshop, and she had such great signups because so many people, that's a thing that doesn't get covered a lot. And now she has a clear list. Not only are they leads, but they're self-identified as self-employed. So now she can give them more specific email content. She can reach out to them in a different way.
And you're mailing, like I get your newsletters. I get to see all aspects of how you do things, and you're on point. Like you're sending newsletters, but not just boring newsletters. Your newsletters are very engaging and of value, where I'm thinking twice about, I'm not gonna click unsubscribe. Because many newsletters, like even though they're your friends, sometimes you're like, unsubscribe, I hope they don't see this.
Yeah.
But when your newsletters come in, they're of true value. Like I see how to, the next few posts to make to create engagement. And I'm like, okay, well, I could actually use that. So let me store that for later. I don't often go back to it, but just the fact that I see the subject line is relatable to me, and I'm like, I need that. I'm going to store that for later. It's kind of like bookmarking it.
Totally.
But again, it's another touch because I'm like, Mallory's in my email. Mallory's in my thing. Mallory's got a seminar coming up, so I'm seeing Mallory, and it's all part of the whole branding, personal branding.
And sometimes when people don't come back to it, it's like that can be like for some people, it's like ADHD or something, right? Like those are problems that I can't necessarily solve once people have the content, but the way that your brain goes, like, I know I'm saving Mal's content for later. You're already identifying me as a trustworthy source and someone you would come back to if you wanted to learn more. It doesn't even necessarily matter if you ended up reading the email, right?
It's top of mind.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about technology and the tools that you use, because this is also a very important segment. We often talk about the things we need to invest in. Like we use Notion for some of our organizational tool. We can build in a CRM in there. We can create templates that are completely unique to our clients. I use Follow Up Boss for my real estate business because it's kind of integrates with my email. What is the one tool to keep people who are not organized? So if you were to suggest, Cam and I have a bit of an issue. We're both very creative and we love speaking and connecting, but we're not the most organized people. We are organized in a certain sense, better than most people, but because of the amount of work we've got, we need to be even more organized. And we're often looking at different tools, but sometimes we overwhelm ourselves with different tools. We want to stick to if I had to take away everything, what is that one tool that you would suggest?
A notebook. If it was one.
She's very old school.
But it was funny, I was having this conversation yesterday with someone who was talking about like this curve that happens, that when you're starting, you start with like the notebook and the Google Drive, right? And then as you grow, you're like, oh, I'm gonna get Notion and I'm gonna get ClickUp and I'm gonna get all these things. And then you're at like peak at moment. And then almost when you come back down to like expert level in your business, you're like, all I need is a Google Drive. And I thought that was a really interesting way to think about it. But for me, I'm so obsessed with just understanding your own brain. And I think that's why we don't have these catchy answers of like Notion for everybody, because it's so about learning which app overwhelms you, which one works for you. And for me, like I would say, if you can brain dump a project in anything, it can be Notion, it can be a Google Drive. If you guys were like, we're launching this podcast, okay, what are all the steps to get to launch? Write those out, be really clear. These are the phases. Here's every little task that goes with it. And then I love a really simple daily to-do list, and it's always gonna start with the thing that's gonna move the needle the most. So it might be fun to say, oh, today I'm gonna play in Canva for the logo for the podcast. But maybe the first thing that would actually move the needle is reaching out to the first 10 guests that you really want, right? But we so default to the fun or like task
creative
things.
stuff.
Yeah, so it's like being really clear. Like my to-do list at the start of the day will often, I never really go past 6 items on a to-do list, because I don't necessarily need to write down, answer this email, unless I'm like, I need to answer Cash's email today because it's going to affect like the needle if I don't get back to this person. So having that priority item and starting with that while you have the most brain power, if your day falls apart, especially as realtors, like getting those tasks done. Too many people start with like checking MLS in the morning or responding to emails. If you could take 30 minutes before that to be like, let me carve out my social strategy that I've been meaning to do for 8 months, right? So that's a big thing for me, is use any system you want as long as you're prioritizing what moves the needle.
Great bits of information and things that we're going to take away from this. Stick to the basics, because often, you're right, we do overwhelm ourselves with different apps, and we're spending more time trying to input things in these apps than actually doing what moves the needle. And that's a great thing I'm going to take that line. Do the things that move the needles.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's people who procrastinate. We have to buy that app and fill this form first and clean our desk and this and that, but none of that is contributing to the podcast, let's say. And the best thing to do is get the 10 guests that you want to have on the show, because that's what your audience wants to see. They don't care about how nice your logo is. So that's a great bit of information. We're going to put that in our strategy.
How would you guide somebody who doesn't really run their day like with standard operating procedures? How would you get them to really build a standard operating procedure list so they can start outsourcing to different virtual assistants or copywriters or different types of personalities?
I think a big thing is documenting what you're doing as you're doing it. So we've been actually doing this a lot. Josh and I sat down last week and I'm like, walk me through the process to list a house. And it can be helpful to do it with somebody else too, where he would be like, then I get like the MLS stuff ready. It's like, well, wait, what does that actually mean, right? Okay, is there a certain criteria? Is there a thing we could then put in? Or, I have a call with the client and then I'll follow up either over text, email, or call. I'm like, okay, well, can we pick one that's by default the thing you do? And maybe we could make it the email because it's easier to outsource. Or if it's gonna be the text, could we pre-write this text so that if you hire more realtors, you're not just telling them like, oh, text and mention this, like just give them the text,
the template.
Right? Yeah. So I think that's why I love like pen to paper, or just like an open document, is just really looking at everything and being like, is there actually more of a step that's in this? Because you could say, and then we stage it. Okay, well, what's our criteria for staging? We kind of have 3 versions of staging. What are those 3 versions? How do you decide which one a property needs? If you can make it almost like people don't have to think to run your system, like you could pull someone in that's not a realtor and they could crush your listing, that's when you realize your systems are good enough.
So is it more important to focus on having those systems locked down and automated in a sense before hopping on like a copywriter who's really good at writing an email list and really making good emails for you, but your systems aren't really flowing properly? Is it bad to get more traffic, you think, before you have all the things set up?
No, I think it's just finding your biggest holes. Like, for example, I am mostly like solopreneur. I've had like some VA hours here and there, but honestly, I do most of my stuff myself. So it's like, my system could be more of a mess and it's okay for now. And I could focus on lead gen because maybe my funnel is set up really well. So if I can get more people in, it's okay that my own content posting schedule is like a little bit of a shit show. Like people will ask me like, oh, do you use like stuff to schedule? I'm like, no, because I'm often coming up with my content the same day, but that works for me. Whereas for someone like him, if you're trying to be maybe less in the day-to-day of your business, of like something like real estate, okay, then we do need those systems in place, because if you're bringing in more leads and you're bringing in more traffic and then you're handing them off to realtors who don't really know your systems, or maybe you don't trust them fully and you don't realize that's because you haven't done like the structure for them to follow. You're like, oh, they kind of, talk to clients differently than I would. Okay, so what's the system to teach them that, right? So I really think it's like, where's the hole in your business and what's the next growth step of the business? Because that's something we've been doing with him, is really, okay, we do need those systems in place. Like if he got 1,000 leads tomorrow, could he handle it? Probably not. Whereas my business could handle 1,000 leads. It's just like maybe my content would fall behind because I don't have that system, but I'm actually pretty okay to handle the 1,000 leads, right? So it's just figuring that out.
Yeah, that was my biggest takeaway from last year. Is I was at a conference and realtors are asking the wrong questions. Everyone wants lead gen. They want more leads. They want more leads, but they're asking the wrong question, because if they got 100 A+ qualified leads right now, you drop the ball, because your systems aren't in place, right? So that really hit the nail on it for me, and I really want to focus on creating good systems before I really try and ramp up and scale a little bit more. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, and I'm not the best in systems, but that's my main priority and focus.
Very interesting, because I think it's a balancing act between working on your systems and actually going to generate those leads. Because you're right, if you don't have the systems, you're going to fall through. Then you don't get the Google reviews. You don't have a happy client who then refers you more business. However, if you're stuck building your back end, you're never going to take the steps on actually working on getting the leads. So great points there. Stick to simple systems is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I think thinking of it as inch by inch, right? It's like if you build your whole system and wait and then go make your lead gen, like it's going to take you a longer time to get clients. If you do all the lead gen and your systems suck, so it's like, okay, what's the base system I can get? Okay, what's the base lead gen? And really inching forward, because it's always going to be evolving and improving, and the systems you even need at the start are not the systems you need when you have 1,000 leads coming in, right? So I think that's the biggest thing, is realizing you're never going to do it perfect. It's never going to be done. So it's just like, okay, what is the version of all of these that we can do at the same time?
Tell us a little bit more about the students you have.
Yeah, so a lot of my students, I find they get just really icked out with other stuff because they feel like that's not how they want to promote their business, or it feels like they have to do this trade-off of, to do sales, I have to be the used cars salesman vibe, or I have to do it this way that I'm seeing online. And so when they find mine and see that I'm not doing it that way, I think it just feels really relieving. I always say, like, if you don't want to dance and point, like, why are you dancing and pointing, right? Like, there's nothing that actually says you have to do that on Instagram Reels or you have to lip sync this. It's just often that's the loudest thing we see. So we go, oh, I have to do that for my business because other business people are doing it. And so I think it's just nice for people to find a space where I'm like, no, you can actually make any form of content and it will work for you if you're leaning into what's authentic to you.
And this is what's very important for the viewers out there. Mallory creates her content based on who she is, and that attracts like-minded people.
Totally.
You want to work with clients who are like yourself. You don't want to reinvent the wheel or have to convince someone of a strategy that you're doing and have to go uphill with that person, because it's just going to drain you. Yeah. And that's the one way to really burn out fast, because then you don't want to convince everybody on what you're doing is correct. The people who are watching you have already gained your, have put their trust in you and have gained you as like, you're the idol and we want to do what Mallory's doing. And then it becomes an easy conversion to just say, hey, I want to learn from you. When can I subscribe, or your workshops or whatever? Yeah. The other thing that I really like what you're doing is the fact that you're pushing people to do more of what they do best. You're not telling them to. So the content strategy is very important. It sounds like you sit down and you strategize with people. Do you do one-on-one coaching, or is it mostly group coaching?
Yeah, I do one-on-one coaching, and then I do have a program where it's like self-led videos, but then we also have an alumni community for people to get feedback from others. And then I have workshops, as you've attended, but those workshops my students in those programs get for free.
What's your community? Where's your community at? Like the online community?
It's just a Facebook group.
Oh, it's a Facebook group.
Yeah,
Okay.
for the alumni, but I have a course like on a course platform, and that's their main material.
Very good. How many students have you served? I know it's probably just like a huge number, because the workshop I was in, I think I counted something like 20 some odd people that were just there for.
Yeah, well, that workshop, Well, that one I actually like maxed out the Zoom room by accident. So a bunch of people couldn't get in, so I had to host it twice. That's a great question. I think it really depends because like last week I hosted a virtual summit. We had over 3,000 people come live.
Wow.
So I am bad with, I would say I'm bad with like common sense. Like if you told me, guess how many jelly beans are in this jar, I wouldn't know if it was like 50,000 or like 50. So I'm really bad with numbers, but I mean thousands for sure in different capacities.
Well, that's really good. I mean, we learned a lot about you today. If you had to, you guys both read books, right?
Yeah.
I see it on your Instagram. You got more into it within the last 2 years, it seems like. Obviously, you read before, but then you got more into the habit of doing it more regularly.
Yeah, I think I just post about it more because it keeps me accountable.
I see. Yeah. That's what I do at the gym.
Yeah, it's really helpful.
Yeah. So if I had a mini house, a tiny house, and I only had a bookshelf that could fit 3 books.
Oof, 3
That's all I could fit there. And I'm living in the middle of the woods. These 3 books are going to help me with my online business, my personal growth, and my, just overall life experience, which I think I'm getting most from you guys, is that you're doing life really well when it comes to taking care of every aspect of it, your health, your wealth, and your personal growth. So those 3 books, what are the 3 books that you would recommend?
The One Thing is a good book. I would suggest it helped early on when we were transitioning from like LVD to like our first business to where we are now. I think it's like all encompassing. It helps you focus on the one thing, but also talks about your like overall life as a whole with a bunch of different pillars. I think it's a really good starting
The
point.
One Thing.
The One Thing. Yeah.
Okay.
That's actually like that when we were talking about what moves the needle. A lot of that concept comes from that book. It's what's the one thing that would make everything else easier or unnecessary, and starting with that.
I like that. Yeah.
And it actually stems from real estate. A quick story on it is like they were trying to get their real estate team to do these tasks, and they were never doing like the one thing that the leader really wanted them to do. So he was shortening their to-do list of like, okay, what if we just did these 3? And it wasn't until he was like, your to-do list today is this one thing.
Amazing.
That they actually got it done, because so often we're scared of the big thing, right? Or we don't want to work on that thing because it feels overwhelming.
I like that because I can relate to that. And I think you can too. We're both similar in that sense where sometimes we dance around the idea and it's like that one thing that needs to be done. We should just focus on
execute
that.
on it.
Yeah. And then once you do that one thing, you feel you feel
Creates
free.
momentum, I find
Yeah,
too.
it builds momentum.
And it's never as bad as you think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
Any other books?
Okay, I was also going to say the one thing. Psychology of Money is a big one for me, because I love just the approach. It helps you understand yourself and your relationship with money, but also just people in general. I think that's the core of everything. Marketing, sales, honestly, enjoying life is just understanding what we need and what other people need. So Psychology of Money is really interesting. It's kind of like no matter what you look at with money, there's these base lessons of how we all relate to money.
And then Die with Zero.
Die with Zero.
Die with Zero. I think it's a really good book. It talks about, I'm blanking right now, but it's to be rich, but rich in memories. And he kind of explains how people die with like a bunch of money and then they either put it to charity or they pass it down to their kids, but their kids are like in their 60s now, right? When they passed, it's like they needed that money when they were in their 30s maybe, you know? So he kind of explains the importance of dying with zero. Obviously, it's hard to die with exactly $0, but he goes through a bunch of examples on how you can die with zero, and he challenges a lot of people's pushbacks, like health insurance or certain things like that people are holding their money for retirement and to pretty much enjoy life now. And that has been a good driver of why we've been able to prioritize travel and our health a little bit more, right? So
That's good. I like that. Finally, I want to know, because watching you guys throughout the year, Mallory, mostly you go in waves with your content.
Yeah.
And which is very authentic, because everyone goes through different waves in their lives where they're focusing on different aspect of, either business or health. What are we to expect from you when it comes to content? Because we talked about a little shift that may be coming up.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to give a hint to some of the viewers as to the direction you want to shift this content to, and maybe some of the stuff you want to introduce to your content. Maybe it's part of your personal growth, because these are probably aspects of where you're headed in your life. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to be growing with you. Give us a bit of what's to be expected from Mallory.
Yeah. So I would preface this with last year at the start of the year, I was a little bored of content and being like a never ending business from every aspect. And I just stepped back and said, well, what would I want to share if I was starting over? Like if my social was my side hustle, what would be the new thing I'd be really excited about? Whether it funnels to my courses or not, because sometimes we can get stuck in that trap of everything has to be like getting them to the email list or things like that. And for me, I really realized so much of where I say, like, people ask the wrong questions. They ask me if they should, have 2 Instagram accounts or 1, what time they should post. And it's like, it's not about that. It's about understanding how you work as a human. I've learned so much about personal development. So that was really when I started sharing more of the personal development stuff of this is the core of what has really transformed me as a person, which has transformed me as an entrepreneur. And so I think for me, it's like turning that up even further of, more just straight talking to camera videos of talking about these big ideas. I think last year I shared a lot of the tactical of like things like, okay, I quit alcohol. This is how that went. This is what I learned. These were pros. This was the easy part. This was the hard part. And in doing that, it's almost like I'm like, oh, now I'm going into that space where people think if I do this one habit, I'm going to end up where Mal is. So now I want to move more into the way you can just look at the world and show people the world through my eyes and really more big picture perspective. An example being we met for coffee with someone on Wednesday and he's like, I'm really trying to figure out my mission, like a really clear statement of what I'm supposed to do. He's like, the last 7 books I've read have been about missions. And I was like, well, a lot of missions are kind of from a capitalist perspective of like the reason you feel you need this super clear sentence is because then you can go market it and build a business around it, more or less. And I think missions are important, but I'm like, you probably already know deep down, like you want to influence people, you want to impact them to make certain changes in their life. Like just knowing him, I'm like, I think I know what your mission is, but I think we can fall into that trap, right? Of thinking these things are so important and just to let him walk away and be like, oh, like maybe I'm done with that task that I was putting so much thought and energy in. I actually just know that. So I think if I can help people with the big perspective shifts, again, that's been the thing that's helped me more than any habit I've introduced.
Yeah, mindset is the biggest key, and perspective with mindset go hand in hand because it's the way you see the world.
Yeah.
And that's great. I think you'll be very successful in that. People do the way they see you, if it's the same way I see you, is that you're a leader, you're a thought leader. So you're a thought leader of life because people live their lives copying others. And sometimes they forget what they want to do or what they're going through and what's important to them. And the only way to really know that is by looking inwards instead of looking outwards. So like you said, the guy's looking for his mission. He's probably looking outwards.
Totally.
What's my mission? What's my mission? But then you look inwards and you're like, what's important to me right now? What should I be working on? And more than ever now, because I do, and I've been preaching this for the past few years, that's why I've prepared myself. I know we're going to go through some economically challenging times because of things getting so expensive. People have to be creative. And part of that is having the right mindset that you're not leaning towards all the things that you used to spend on that made you happy. You're going to find other ways to get you happy and maybe cut back on that. And it goes back to your content because I know you like to run your business on a very effective and smaller budget.
Yep.
Like without overspending. And that's a very powerful tool. Like if I want to learn how to run a business effectively, that would be a great type of content that I want to see is how to get the same kind of results, but without just throwing money at the problems, right? So great. It's been amazing. Thank you so much for reaching out, coming here from Ottawa. I know you guys had other things planned here. This has been a great last minute podcast, and I truly appreciate your time and the wealth of knowledge you've shared with us today.
That's all.
We hope to have you back here for another episode, maybe.
Thanks for having
Love
us.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and cheers.